Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Gentleman's Magazine from May 1800. And this article is entitled Retrospect of the 18th Century, Essay 4. Now, this is the fourth in a series, and it's been really interesting so far, and we have come through a very quick retrospect of the 17th century, as well as William and Mary, which was at the beginning of the 18th century, and the reign of Queen Anne. So I believe we're up to, 1717, something like that. Anyways, so I mean it's we're not very far, so we're gonna move on from there, and I'm interested to find out what they have to say, because so far our experience has been that it's been very enlightening to read this because it's very, very accurate. So far I'm really happy with how accurate it is. So let's keep going and see how things progress. Yeah. The treaty between France and England being signed at Utrecht, as before noticed. Peace was proclaimed in London on the 5th day of May, 1713, and the Parliament being assembled to deliberate on the articles, many of the first political characters urged strong objections to several of them. Indeed, it appeared to be the general opinion of all but the ministers and their abettors that the terms were not so advantageous as England ought to have obtained, considering the flourishing state of her finances and the successes which had attended her arms. But the Treaty of Commerce, contained in the 8th and 9th articles, gave particular offense, so that petitions from all parts of the kingdom were presented against the passing a bill for rendering it effectual, and so conclusive were the arguments urged against it by the trading interest that the bill was rejected by a small majority. Small majority? I was expecting minority. Okay, so we're talking about the treaty between France and England at Utrecht in 1713. I will look that up later. As always, we'll do our fact-checking at the end. So, Parliament was actually against it, except for a few people, yeah? Though the treaty was thus objected to by considerable numbers of both houses of Parliament, yet they presented most loyal address to Her Majesty, thanking her for her paternal care and in thus providing for the tranquility and prosperity of the nation. Okay. No sooner was the peace concluded than strange apprehensions arose in the breasts of many, from the continual advances of the Tory interest, and from persons of that party being chosen by Her Majesty to fill every office about her loyal person, and that the Protestant succession was in imminent danger. Yeah, we talked about this, and they actually made a law about this. Yeah, are they going to mention that here, or were they just counting on the previous mentioning of it? Basically, the law that was ratified around this time was that no one is allowed to become king or queen of England unless they are Protestant. So you're not allowed to be Catholic, and you're not allowed to be married to a Catholic. By the way, this still in force. Yeah, I double-checked it, and it is still in force today, although it's not quite as strict as it was. But it sure is still there. It's interesting that that prejudice against Catholics continues to today. Anyways, Protestant succession, yeah? Both houses of Parliament resounded with speeches on this supposed evil, and the pens in the favor of the champions of the Whig party were exerted too successfully, for the idea became so prevalent that everyone was painfully anxious for the security of his property, and such a demand was made on the bank as appeared to threaten the public credit. Jeez, that's not good. But these fears were, in some measure, allayed by the Queen's assuring the Lord Mayor of her intention to speedily opening her Parliament, and that she was recovered from her indisposition, that there was no fleet fitting out in the French ports, that the Pretender was still in Lorraine, the contrary to which had been confidently asserted, and that the whole of the alarm had arisen from the misguided zeal of the writers in the employment of the different parties. So we're still talking about Queen Anne, right? I'm pretty sure. Little of consequence occurred from this time till the period when Her Majesty really was seriously indisposed, though the different parties became more violent against each other. Sheesh. And so impeded the wheels of government, as not only the Parliament, but even the Council was distracted by them, and they tended greatly to accelerate Her Majesty's dissolution. Though the Queen publicly and privately endeavoured to reconcile these disputants, assuring her Parliament that it would be a real strengthening to the succession of the House of Hanover, as well as a support to her government, that an end were put to their groundless fears and jealousies. Yet even in her presence, Oxford and Bolingbroke could not refrain from mutually approaching each other, and so far were their dissensions carried, that the council chamber became a scene of bitter altercation and implacable dispute. From the decline of Her Majesty's health, and from her decided approbation of many of her present ministers, several of whom were strongly suspected of favouring the House of Stuart, the friends of the Pretender began to revive their hopes that on Her Majesty's dissolution they should be able to place their favourite on the throne. For this purpose, meetings of the Papists were held in different parts of the kingdom, and even proceeded to the enlisting of soldiers to favour their design. In consequence of this, a proclamation was published offering £5,000 for apprehending the Pretender, should he land or attempt to land in Great Britain, to which the Commons offered an additional reward of £100,000, to any person who should perform so acceptable a service to their country. And a bill was proposed, making it high treason in any who should enlist into this Pretender's service. I believe it wasn't one of Queen Anne's brothers, I want to say? I'll look it up later, but I'm pretty sure that it was a direct relative of hers. The altercation between the heads of the ministry continuing, Oxford was at last dismissed in an abrupt manner before any person had been thought of to fill his situation, which occasioned such confusion and debate in court that the Queen, by her long attendance at a cabinet council on the 12th day of July, so exhausted her spirits that she was seized with a lethargic disorder which baffled all the efforts of her physicians to remove, and her life was considered as in imminent danger. Yeah, well, she probably was. Okay, the committee of the council being assembled at Kensington, the Dukes of Somerset and Argyle voluntarily offered their services, and the council agreed to recommend the Duke of Shrewsbury, yeah, something like that, for Lord Treasurer, which meeting the Queen's approbation, he received the appointment without relinquishing his other employments of Lord Chamberlain and Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, so that at one time he held the 3 greatest posts in the kingdom. Okay, we'll look him up later. It being proposed to assemble all the privy councillors in the vicinity of London, a full board was held, consisting of many members of both parties, and it was resolved to put the kingdom in the best state of defence that it was possible. Several regiments were ordered into the neighbourhood of the metropolis, others were sent for from the Netherlands. An embargo was laid on shipping, and a fleet under the command of the Earl of Berkeley directed to be equipped immediately. Though Her Majesty's order was from the commencement considered as fatal, yet the continued decline in the same state of stupor till the 1st day of August 1714, when she expired about 7 in the morning, in the 50th year of her age, and the 13th of her reign. She didn't live very long. I wonder what she died of. To give an outline of Her Majesty's character requires not that impartiality which most public situations demand, for though her reign, especially the close of it, is particularly marked by those actions and parties which are the bane of all private happiness and public prosperity, yet from her maternal affections towards her people ever enjoyed the sincere esteem, I think they mean they ever enjoyed the sincere esteem and undissembled respect of her subjects. In her person, Her Majesty was full middle size and of due proportion, with a round countenance with regular features, dark hair, and ruddy complexion. She had a pleasing voice and an engaging carriage, endowed with good natural parts, though which, though not much enriched by education, enabled her to fill her exalted station with becoming dignity, perseverance, and affability. But as the circumstances of the times in which she lived called for the greatest vigor of mind and determination of spirit, some historians have attributed to her a degree of pusillanimity. I never heard that word before. Let's try this. That's correct. Pusillanimity. Lack of courage or determination. Timidity. If you say so. Okay, here we go. Some historians have attributed to her a degree of pusillanimity, which upon a calm investigation of her situation will perhaps be found to be unjust. She was, in her religion, a warm friend to the Protestant cause, as by law established in her realm. Truly pious herself, she encouraged the same virtue in others. Thus sincere in her devotion toward God, the corresponding virtues of justice, mercy, compassion, and benevolence were by her exerted towards her fellow creatures. Faithful and affectionate to her husband, she was one of the best wives, a most tender mother to her children, all of whom she had the affliction to consign to an early grave. She was a steady and warm patron of genius and nucrit. I'm not sure what that says. I'll have to figure it out. And a most sincere and generous friend. In fine, she was a kind mistress, a gracious and condescending princess, more the mother than the ruler of her people, and if she was not the greatest, she was certainly one of the best and most unblemished sovereigns that ever sat on the British throne. T. Mott, FSM. That interesting. Like, I wasn't quite expecting that. I was actually expecting them to move on from Queen Anne, but it looks like they had a few words to say about the end of her reign. So, yeah, I felt like we had already gotten to that point. But I guess it was quite busy at the end, yeah? Like, there was a lot that happened. I mean, you think about, like, the war ending, yeah? Treaty with France, and how the people felt about it, plus discussion of succession, and the concern that I believe it was her brother who wanted to be on the throne, and they didn't want him to because he was Catholic, I'm pretty sure. Because she came from a mixed family. Some of them are Catholic, some are Protestant. She was Protestant as well as her father, but her brother was not, and I'm pretty sure that's who it was. So let's take a look. Let's look it up. Queen Anne. I know I've looked this one up before, but it would be worth looking at again. Anne, Queen of Great Britain. So, from the 6th of February, 1665 to the 1st of August, 1714. And she began her reign in Scotland and Ireland, both in 1707. All right, moving on. So what I really want is not her marriage or her accession, but rather, I'm skipping William and Mary, Act of Settlement. We talked about that last time. But I want to get to a point where it's the end of her reign. Death of her husband, War of Spanish Succession. Okay. So that's what they were talking about, the War of Spanish Succession. So let's read about that, and then her death. So the War of the Spanish Succession. As the expensive War of the Spanish Succession grew unpopular, so did the Whig administration. The impeachment of Henry Sacheverell, a high church Tory Anglican who had preached anti-Whig sermons, led to further public discontent. Anne thought Sacheverell ought to be punished for questioning the glorious revolution, but that punishment should only be a mild one to prevent further public commotion. In London, riots broke out in support of Sacheverell, but the troops available to quell but the only troops available to quell disturbances were Anne's guards. The Secretary of State Sunderland was reluctant to use them and leave the Queen less protected. Anne declared God would be her guard and ordered Sunderland to redeploy her troops. In line with Anne's view, Sacheverell was convicted, but his sentence, suspension of preaching for 3 years, was so light as to render the trial a mockery. Huh, interesting, but they didn't really mention that in the article, so let's just move on. The Queen, increasingly disdainful of the Marlboroughs and her ministry, finally took the opportunity to dismiss Sunderland in June 1710. Godolphin followed in August. The junto Whigs were removed from office, although Marlborough, for the moment, remained as commander of the army. In their place, she appointed a new ministry headed by Harley, which began to seek peace with France. Unlike the Whigs, Harley and his ministry were ready to compromise by giving Spain to the Bourbon claimant, Philip of Anjou. Okay, that must be who they were talking about, the pretender, yeah? Bourbon claimant? In return for commercial successions in the parliamentary elections that soon followed his appointment, Harley, aided by government patronage, secured a large Tory majority. In January 1711, Anne forced Sarah to resign her court offices, and Abigail took over as keeper of the privy purse. Harley was stabbed by a disgruntled French refugee, the Marquis de Guiscard, in March, and Anne wept at the thought that he would die. He recovered slowly. Godolphin's death from natural causes in September 1712 reduced Anne to tears. She blamed their estrangement on the Marlboroughs. It's interesting because they specifically said that she was really friendly with the wife of the Duke of Marlborough, and that they had grown apart because she got to a point where she didn't like her. And so it was more like a fight against the wives than it was the husband. Like, even though the husband was the Duke. Oh, it's confusing because she blamed their estrangement on the Marlboroughs. Like, why? How would it be their fault? You know? I feel like she's pointing fingers at the moment, and that's just silly. All right. The elder brother of Archduke Charles, Emperor Joseph I, died in April 1711, and Charles succeeded him in Austria-Hungary, and the Roman Empire. To also give him the Spanish throne was no longer in Britain's interest, but the proposed Peace of Utrecht, submitted to Parliament for ratification, did not go as far as the Whigs wanted to curb Bourbon ambitions. In the House of Commons, the Tory majority was unassailable, but the same was not true in the House of Lords. The Whigs secured the support of the Earl of Nottingham against the treaty by promising to support his occasional conformity bill, seeing a need for decisive action to erase the anti-peace majority in the House of Lords, and seeing no alternative, and reluctantly created 12 new peers, even though such a mass creation of peers was unprecedented. Huh. Oh my gosh, that was totally political. That's so annoying. So she said, hey, I'm a Tory, and I think I like a Tory. I like Tories. Yeah? Tories being loyal to the king and queen. And I have a majority in one house, in the House of Commons, but not in the House of Lords. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create more lords, and they're all going to be Tories. So she did. Like, that's... yeah, she's a little bit of a dictator, you know? Like, she wants her way. She doesn't really care what the people want. That's a little crazy to me. Abigail's husband, Samuel Masham, was made a baron, though Anne protested to Harley that she never had any design to make a great lady of Abigail, and should lose a useful servant. On the same day, Marlborough was dismissed as commander of the army, the peace treaty was ratified, and Britain's military involvement in the War of the Spanish Succession ended. By signing the Treaty of Utrecht, King Louis XIV of France recognized the Hanoverian succession in Britain. Nevertheless, gossip that Anne and her ministers favored the succession of her half-brother rather than the Hanoverians continued, despite Anne's denial in public and in private, so it doesn't sound like she did, yeah? The rumors were fed by her consistent refusals to permit any of the Hanoverians to visit or move to England. I wonder why. By the intrigues of Harley and the Tory Secretary of State Lord Bolingbroke, who were in separate and secret discussions with their half-brother about a possible Stuart restoration until early in 1714. She's a little weird, yeah? A little on the strange side. Like, what are you doing? Alright, death. Anne was unable to walk between January and July 1713. At Christmas, she was feverish and lay unconscious for hours, which led to rumors of her impending death. She recovered, but was seriously ill again in March. By July, Anne had lost confidence in Harley. His secretary recorded that Anne told the cabinet that he neglected all business, that he was seldom to be understood, and that when he did explain himself, she could not depend upon the truth of what he said. That he never came to her at the time she appointed, that he often came drunk, and last, to crown all, he behaved himself towards her with an ill manner, indecency, and disrespect. Yeah, that's not good. On 27 July 1714, during Parliament's summer recess, she dismissed Harley as Lord Treasurer. Despite her failing health, which her doctors blamed on the emotional strain of matters of state, she attended 2 late-night cabinet meetings that failed to determine Harley's successor. A third meeting was cancelled when she became too ill to attend. She was rendered unable to speak by a stroke on the 30th of July, 1714, the anniversary of Gloucester's death, and on the advice of the Privy Council, handed the Treasurer's staff to office to Whig grandee Charles Talbot, first Duke of Shrewsbury. Anne died around 7:30 a.m. on the 1st of August, 1714. John Arbuthnot, one of her doctors, thought her death was a release from a life of ill health and tragedy. He wrote to Jonathan Swift, "I believe sleep was never more welcome to a weary traveler than death was to her." She was buried beside her husband and her children in the Henry VII Chapel on the south aisle of Westminster Abbey on the 24th of August. And then the succession was actually a big issue. They eventually decided on Sophia, who was her first cousin, but she actually died almost at the same time as Anne, yeah. So the Electress Sophia had died on 28th of May, 2 months before Anne. So the Electress's son, George, Elector of Hanover, succeeded pursuant to the Act of Settlement 1701. The possible Catholic claimants, including Anne's half-brother, James Francis Edward Stuart, were ignored. Elector's accession was relatively stable. A Jacobite rising in 1715 failed. Marlborough was reinstated, and the Tory ministers were replaced by Whigs because George was a Whig. That's okay, sure. That's funny though. But yeah, I thought that it was her brother, like her brother had something to do with it. So yeah, apparently there was more than one. It's a little bit frustrating that this article doesn't specify names. Like, there's not very many names mentioned. Like, name drop a little more, you know? They just call the person who's trying to get the throne the pretender. You know, you could be more specific about that. That's a little bit frustrating, but other than that, it sounds very, very accurate, like, once again. I feel like there was a lot of back and forth at the end there where it was a little bit hard to follow. It was like, wait, so she fired the Duke of Marlborough and kicked them out of court, and then then she appointed someone, and then they took him off and got a new person. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of back and forth. So I feel like she was a little bit desperate at the end there. Yeah. Like, she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping out of her grasp. It was, though, but not for the reason that she thought. It was simply because she was dying. And that she would be dead soon. Like, that's the reason. That's the actual reason. But, I don't know, it's a little bit strange. Because she could have continued on in the same vein she was without fighting everybody, you know? You don't have to, appoint people and then make people lords and stuffs just so you can expand the House of Lords, that's kind of a crappy thing to do too. Like, you really want your own way, don't you? Yeah, that's... Anyways, I'm kind of done with that, but I'm a touch disappointed that it wasn't more new material. I feel like this was a lot of like a repetition of what we'd already talked about, but we'll continue with this series until it's finished, just because I really want to complete the century, and we're only up to 1714. So anyways, but either way, I hope you enjoyed the Microfiche time capsule today. If you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.